The rain started at exactly 2:13 inches the morning. Not a storm, not thunder, just a cold, steady rain falling over a quiet neighborhood outside Denver, Colorado. Most people were asleep. Streetlights flickered on wet pavement. Dogs stopped barking. And somewhere inside a small yellow house at the end of Briarwood Lane, something happened so disturbing that even veteran detectives would later admit they couldn't stop thinking about it. When police entered the home 3 days later, they found dinner still sitting on the kitchen table, a television quietly playing static in the living room, a phone charging beside the couch, and deep inside the basement, a crime scene so strange, so unsettling, that investigators would spend months trying to understand what they were actually looking at. But here's the part nobody can explain. There were no signs of forced entry, no screams reported, no fingerprints from strangers, and according to security cameras, nobody ever left the house. This case exploded across America for one reason. The deeper investigators looked, the darker it became. Because every answer uncovered another terrifying question. And tonight, we're walking through every detail. This is the disturbing crime scene discovery America can't stop talking about. 34-year-old Daniel Mercer wasn't the kind of man neighbors worried about. He worked remotely as a software analyst, kept his lawn perfectly trimmed, and waved politely every morning while walking his golden retriever, Scout. People described him as quiet, maybe a little isolated, but harmless. He had moved into the neighborhood less than 2 years earlier after a divorce. Nobody knew much about his past, except that he came from Ohio and preferred to keep to himself. The only person who regularly visited the house was his younger sister, Emily. And according to her, Daniel had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. At first, it was little things. Missed phone calls, curtains always closed, lights on at odd hours. Then came the messages. Emily later shared screenshots with investigators. Daniel claimed someone had been entering his home while he slept. He said objects were moving. Doors were opening by themselves. One message simply read, "I think somebody is inside the walls." At first, Emily assumed her brother was having some kind of breakdown. Stress, paranoia, maybe depression after the divorce. She begged him to see a doctor, but Daniel refused. Instead, he bought security cameras, more locks, motion sensors, and according to neighbors, he stopped leaving the house entirely during the final week anyone saw him alive. Then came Sunday night. At 11:48 p.m., Daniel called 911. The audio from that call was never officially released to the public, but portions leaked online months later. And people who heard it described the same thing: pure fear. Not panic, not confusion, fear. Daniel whispered for most of the call. He told dispatchers someone was inside his basement. When the operator asked if he could escape, he reportedly said something chilling. "He wants me to come downstairs." Then there was a loud crashing noise, heavy breathing, and silence. Police were dispatched immediately. But when officers arrived 7 minutes later, the house was empty. No broken windows, no forced doors, nothing stolen. Scout, the dog, was found wandering the backyard soaking wet from the rain. Officers searched the home briefly but found no sign of Daniel or any intruder. Since there was no evidence of a crime, they logged the call as suspicious circumstances and left. That decision would later haunt everyone involved. 3 days passed before anyone returned to the house. Emily became worried after Daniel stopped answering texts. She drove to the property Wednesday afternoon and immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door was unlocked. The smell hit her first. Not decay exactly, something metallic, damp, heavy, like wet concrete and blood. She called police from outside. This time, officers performed a full search. The upstairs looked untouched. Coffee still sitting in a mug beside Daniel's laptop. Laundry half folded on the couch. One bedroom light still on. But the basement door was different. Investigators later said it looked like someone had tried to seal it shut from the inside. When officers forced it open, they found deep scratch marks running across the wood. That's when things became disturbing. The basement itself wasn't large. Concrete floor, water heater, storage shelves, old furniture, covered in plastic sheets. But in the center of the room sat a wooden chair facing the wall. And surrounding the chair, investigators found dozens of handwritten notes taped everywhere. On pipes, on boxes, on the walls. Every note carried variations of the same message. He is still here. Don't let him hear you. Stay awake. Some notes appeared rushed and frantic. Others looked carefully written. Then officers noticed something else. The wall directly in front of the chair had been partially broken open. Not demolished. Opened, like someone had been digging into it by hand. Inside the wall cavity, police found traces of blood. Human blood. But no body. And Daniel Mercer was nowhere to be found. The case exploded online almost immediately. Photos leaked. True crime forums lit up. TikTok creators called it the basement wall mystery. Within days, millions of people were dissecting every detail. And then investigators discovered something even stranger. Daniel's security cameras had been disabled the same night he vanished. All except one. A single basement camera survived. But the footage created more questions than answers. According to investigators, the recording showed Daniel entering the basement around 11:41 p.m. carrying a flashlight. He appeared nervous, constantly looking behind him. Then he placed the chair in the middle of the room and stared directly at the wall for nearly 4 minutes without moving. Not speaking, not blinking much, just staring. Then the audio captured a sound, a faint knocking noise, coming from inside the wall. 3 slow knocks. Daniel immediately froze. And according to detectives, he whispered something barely audible. "You said you'd stop." Then the camera feed suddenly glitched. Static filled the screen for almost 9 seconds. When the footage returned, Daniel was gone. The chair had tipped over, and the basement was empty. No visible exit. No intruder. Nothing. America became obsessed. News stations debated whether it was mental illness, a staged disappearance, or something more sinister. Internet detectives slowed the footage frame by frame, searching for hidden figures or shadows. But investigators focused on something else entirely: the house itself. Because construction records revealed a bizarre detail nobody knew before. The basement walls had been rebuilt 12 years earlier, after a previous owner reported hearing noises inside them. That owner was a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Holloway, and what she told police sent the investigation into an entirely darker direction. Margaret claimed she lived in constant fear during her final months inside the home. She reported hearing movement at night, soft knocking sounds, footsteps beneath the floorboards. At one point, she hired contractors to inspect the basement. According to records, workers discovered a narrow, hidden passage behind the wall, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. The tunnel stretched underneath part of the neighborhood before collapsing several feet underground. Nobody could explain why it existed or who built it. Margaret moved out less than a month later. And after hearing this, investigators returned to Daniel's basement with ground-penetrating radar. What they discovered beneath the foundation shocked everyone. There were additional hollow spaces underground, large ones. Some appeared interconnected. Search crews brought in excavation teams. Reporters lined the streets. Helicopters circled overhead while neighbors watched from behind police tape. Then came the discovery that turned this from a missing persons case into national headlines. Deep beneath the basement foundation, investigators uncovered a hidden chamber. Inside, they found old furniture, blankets, food wrappers, water bottles. Someone had been living there, possibly for years. And near the back wall of the chamber, investigators found dozens of photographs, all of Daniel Mercer, sleeping, watching television, working at his computer, photos clearly taken from inside the house, without his knowledge. That revelation terrified people across the country, because suddenly Daniel's paranoia didn't sound imaginary anymore. It sounded real. Investigators believed someone may have secretly accessed the home through underground tunnels for an unknown period of time. And if that was true, then where was Daniel now? The FBI joined the case 2 days later. Agents mapped the tunnels beneath the neighborhood and discovered portions connected to abandoned storm drainage systems dating back to the 1970s. Most passages had collapsed long ago, but some remained accessible. Search teams spent weeks combing through the underground maze. What they found only deepened the nightmare. In one tunnel, investigators located canned food, dated just months earlier. In another, they discovered battery-powered lanterns. Then came the most disturbing find of all. A small recorder buried inside a plastic container. The audio files on it were horrifying. Someone had been recording Daniel inside his house. Hours of recordings. Him cooking, sleeping, talking to his sister, on the phone. And mixed between those recordings were whispers from an unknown male voice. "I'm still here. You never see me." He belongs to the house. Experts later confirmed the recordings were authentic and unedited. At this point, fear spread through the neighborhood itself. Residents demanded inspections of nearby homes. Some temporarily moved out. Others boarded up crawl spaces and basements because nobody knew who had been living underground or whether they were still there. Then investigators uncovered one final clue connected to the night Daniel vanished. A neighbor's security camera captured a figure emerging from a storm drain nearly half a mile away, around 12:06 a.m. The person appeared thin, covered in mud, wearing dark clothing, and dragging something heavy behind them. The footage was grainy. Police could never identify the figure. But what happened next made the mystery even darker. The individual suddenly stopped in the middle of the street and looked directly toward the camera. Then the video cut out. No explanation. No technical malfunction. Just blackness. To this day, Daniel Mercer has never been found. No body. No confirmed suspect. No arrests. Some investigators believe Daniel was murdered by someone secretly living beneath his home. Others think Daniel himself may have suffered a psychological break and staged parts of the scene before disappearing into the tunnels. But the evidence doesn't fully support either theory. And there's one detail detectives still refuse to explain publicly. According to leaked reports, investigators discovered fresh handwritten notes appearing inside the basement weeks after the house had been sealed by police. New notes. Different handwriting. One message simply read, "He came back." The house remains empty today. Neighbors say lights occasionally flicker inside, despite electricity being disconnected months ago. Police deny those claims. But online investigators continue tracking every update, every leak, every unexplained detail tied to the case. Because people can't stop asking the same question. If someone really lived beneath that house for years, how many other homes could they have accessed? And how many people would ever know? Maybe the most disturbing part of this entire story isn't what investigators found in that basement. It's the possibility that Daniel Mercer was telling the truth from the very beginning, and nobody believed him until it was too late. If this story disturbed you, you're not alone. Comment below with your theory about what really happened inside that house. And if you want more true crime stories that keep millions of people awake at night, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next case we cover might be even more terrifying than this one. For nearly 8 months, the Mercer case dominated headlines across America. Cable news stations replayed the tunnel footage every night. Podcasts built entire seasons around the mystery. Former FBI profilers debated theories online. And somehow, the deeper people looked into the case, the less sense it made. Because investigators eventually discovered something they never released publicly during the early stages of the investigation. Daniel Mercer wasn't the first person connected to that house to disappear. 21 years earlier, another resident vanished under almost identical circumstances. His name was Victor Hale. Most people had never heard of him because the case barely made local news back then. Victor was a 46-year-old electrician who lived alone in the same house long before renovations sealed parts of the basement. According to old police reports, neighbors described hearing loud banging noises coming from underground during the weeks before he disappeared. Then one night, he was simply gone. No signs of struggle. No vehicle missing. Wallet still inside the kitchen drawer. And according to one witness statement buried in archived records, officers responding to the scene noticed dirt and mud tracked across the basement floor leading toward a damaged wall. Sound familiar? At the time, police assumed Victor abandoned his life voluntarily. The investigation faded quickly, but after Daniel's disappearance, Detectives reopened those files and realized the similarities were impossible to ignore. Same house, same basement, same reports of noises inside the walls, and both men vanished without a trace. But here's where the story takes another turn. Investigators eventually learned Daniel had secretly been researching Victor Hale for weeks before his own disappearance. Search history recovered from Daniel's laptop showed dozens of searches connected to the old case. Archived newspaper scans, public records, even underground tunnel maps tied to city maintenance projects from the 1980s. It looked like Daniel had become obsessed. And then detectives found one final video file hidden deep inside an encrypted folder on his computer. The file was time-stamped just 4 hours before the 911 call. At first, the footage seemed normal. Daniel sat alone in his living room, speaking directly into the camera. His eyes looked exhausted, red, like he hadn't slept in days. But what he said sent chills through investigators. "I know people think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I thought that too for a while. But somebody's been living underneath this house. I hear him every night. He watches me when I sleep." Daniel paused for several seconds and looked toward the hallway behind him. Then he continued, "I found the entrance 3 days ago." That single sentence changed everything. Because according to investigators, Daniel then claimed he had crawled through one of the hidden tunnels beneath the basement. And what he described inside was horrifying. He said the underground chambers were filled with stolen items dating back decades. Watches, old photographs, clothing, children's toys, newspapers stacked in piles reaching the ceiling, like someone had been collecting pieces of other people's lives for years, maybe longer. Then Daniel said something even stranger. "He told me the house belongs to him." Investigators believe Daniel was referring to the unknown person suspected of living beneath the property. But the way Daniel described the encounter felt deeply unsettling, almost personal, as if he had spoken face-to-face with whoever was down there. Then the video changed. Daniel suddenly lowered his voice to almost a whisper. He says he's been here longer than anyone knows. A loud knocking sound interrupted the recording. 3 slow knocks, exactly like the basement camera footage. Daniel immediately froze, and for the first time during the video, he looked genuinely terrified. Not paranoid, not unstable, terrified. Then he leaned toward the camera and said something investigators initially refused to release to the public. He said Victor tried to leave too. The screen abruptly went black. Seconds later, no ending, no explanation, just silence. When leaked transcripts of that video surfaced online, the internet exploded again. Millions of people became convinced the disappearances were connected to a hidden predator living beneath the neighborhood for decades. And police started receiving calls from residents across the country reporting strange sounds inside their own walls and basements. Some of those reports turned out to be nothing. Others were not. In one shocking incident outside Chicago, authorities discovered a homeless man secretly living inside an unused crawlspace connected to multiple homes. In another case in Oregon, police uncovered hidden attic access routes between old apartment buildings. Suddenly, Daniel's story no longer felt impossible. It felt real enough to scare people. But the biggest breakthrough in the Mercer investigation came almost a year after Daniel vanished. A construction crew repairing storm drainage tunnels less than 2 miles from Briarwood Lane found something buried beneath collapsed concrete. A backpack. Inside were items belonging to Daniel Mercer, his wallet, his phone, and a small notebook damaged by water. Most pages were unreadable, except one. Written in shaky handwriting were 5 words investigators still refused to publicly comment on. He never worked alone. That sentence changed the entire direction of the investigation. Because now detectives weren't asking whether someone lived beneath the house. They were asking how many people were involved. Search operations expanded again. FBI agents revisited every missing persons report connected to the surrounding counties dating back 30 years. Patterns slowly began to emerge. Several disappearances occurred within a 10-mile radius of old drainage access systems. Most victims lived alone. Most reported unusual disturbances before vanishing. And nearly all the cases went cold within weeks. Some investigators quietly feared they were dealing with something much larger than a single stalker hiding underground. But before authorities could confirm anything, another terrifying event happened. A retired detective named Arthur Vance appeared on a late-night podcast claiming he had worked part of the original Victor Hale investigation decades earlier. At first, listeners thought it was just another interview chasing attention. But halfway through the broadcast, Vance revealed information never made public. According to him, officers investigating Victor's disappearance discovered evidence suggesting someone had been secretly entering homes through maintenance tunnels beneath the neighborhood as far back as the late 1980s. But the investigation was shut down. Why? Vance claimed local officials feared public panic. And then he said something that made the host go completely silent. "We heard voices down there." The detective described crawling through narrow underground passages during the original investigation. He said officers repeatedly heard movement nearby, despite finding nobody. Footsteps, whispering, metal scraping against concrete. At one point, he claimed his flashlight illuminated what looked like a person standing at the far end of a tunnel before disappearing into darkness. But the most chilling part came next. According to Vance, one officer later quit the force after insisting there wasn't just one person underground. There were multiple voices, he said, like a community. The interview spread across social media within hours. Some people dismissed it as conspiracy. Others became convinced the truth was far darker than authorities admitted. Then, less than 48 hours after the podcast aired, Arthur Vance disappeared. His car was found abandoned near a hiking trail outside Boulder, Colorado. No sign of him since. At that point, fear surrounding the Mercer case reached another level entirely. Online forums tracked every tunnel system across the country. Urban explorers uploaded videos searching abandoned drainage networks. Some claimed they found evidence of hidden camps underground. Others reported hearing knocks echoing through tunnels before cameras suddenly malfunctioned. Police warned people to stay away from storm drains and abandoned infrastructure. But curiosity kept spreading, because people couldn't shake one terrifying possibility. What if Daniel Mercer uncovered something he was never supposed to find? To this day, nobody knows exactly what happened inside that house on Briarwood Lane. The property was eventually demolished after repeated break-ins from curiosity seekers and online investigators. But workers involved in the demolition later claimed crews refused to continue after hearing unexplained noises beneath the foundation during excavation. Officially, those reports were dismissed. Unofficially, many workers never returned to the site. Today, the land where the house once stood is completely empty. Just dirt, dead grass, and a chain-link fence surrounding a patch of ground most locals avoid after dark. But every now and then, drivers passing the area late at night report something strange. 3 slow knocks, coming from underground. Maybe it's just urban legend. Maybe fear turned a tragic disappearance into something larger than reality. Or maybe Daniel Mercer discovered the horrifying truth hiding beneath his home and paid the price for it. And honestly, that might be the scariest part of all. Because if someone really spent decades living unseen beneath ordinary neighborhoods, watching families through walls, listening from below while people slept peacefully upstairs, how would anyone ever know? If you made it to the end, comment your theory below. Was Daniel Mercer the victim of something real, or did paranoia consume him completely? And if you want more disturbing true crime stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare, subscribe now, because the next story might make you question the safety of your own home tonight.